everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of August. August was a pretty decent reading month for me. I read more than I thought I would. It was my birthday month, which is always fun. It really did go by very quickly, or should I say it slipped away into a moment in time, almost like a bottle of wine. No, but really, this month flew by. I cannot believe how quickly it went by. So I ended up fully reading 9 books this month. I am really close to finishing 2 more, but they're not gonna get done until September, so I'll just save them for my September wrap up. And then I sort of DNF'd 1 book, but I don't know if I'm counting it as a DNF. So why don't we start there? The book that I sort of DNF'd is The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reed. I read pretty much to the halfway point of this book. It is a little long in this Illumicrate edition, just over 400 pages, but also it's the most gorgeous edition of a book like I've ever owned. It's definitely one of my most favorite looking books. And I was pretty excited for it. I was pretty excited for the atmosphere and the aesthetic of it. This is a story about this town where all the women are magic. All the women and girls have this magic power to them, except for your main character, whose name is Evie. And Evie is powerless, and so she's like the outcast of her town and her village. There's a whole lot of world building, a whole lot of story building to this that I honestly don't even remember because this was like the first book I picked up in August. But things have happened. There have been fights. There's different parts of the world and such. But specifically with this village that Evie lives in, every year the Woodsmen come to take one girl from their town. And so every year there's like this panic of, oh, who are they going to take? But she has always been safe because she doesn't have powers. But this year something happens where she ends up being the one that is taken, and she ends up with this woodsman on this journey, and things happen. I was really loving the first part of this book. I think it is written beautifully. I think the atmosphere is amazing. It was literally exactly what I was looking for when it comes to vibes in a fantasy book, but it was just really slow, super slow paced, like insanely slow paced. And more recently, I've been trying to not read the synopsis of books because I've been trying to just let myself be a little bit more surprised by books, not get my expectations up on certain storylines. Like I really just want to see what happens with books. And so I tried going into this not knowing much about it, and then I was getting so bored that I had to keep reading the synopsis to see what was going to happen, what's the point of the story. And there are pieces of the synopsis that I still haven't even gotten to halfway through the book, and it just is moving way too slow for me. I just need more to happen. I was wanting more romance, and I don't know if that's something that's going to happen. It's okay if it's not, but like I can't tell if this is going to be super romantic or not, and I wish I would kind of know that halfway through. Anyway, I don't know. Yeah, I read half of it and then I could not force myself to pick it up anymore. I might try to come back to this one. I also just haven't heard a lot of people talk about this book or heard many reviews, so that kind of also will be a little contingent on it. Like if I go out seeking a bunch of reviews and see many people say the same thing and that they weren't satisfied with the ending, it may not be worth me reading another 200 pages of this book. But it is a really pretty book that I want to continue to own, and so I don't want to keep it if I'm not going to read it. So I don't know, I'm having a hard time figuring out what to do. If you've read this book, let me know. What are your thoughts down below, especially if you're like me and you've had a trouble getting through the first half of the book. Like I mentioned, I'm also almost done with 2 other books, so I will just preview those now, and you can stay tuned for the September wrap up to hear my final thoughts on them. But the first one is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This one I'm probably only like 55 to 60% through, but I know that I have to finish it this week because I'm reading this for a book club with my coworkers, and so I know this is going to get done in the next couple of days. It is just not capturing my attention enough to have finished it by today when I'm filming this. This is a new book from the same author of The Martian. I did not read The Martian, however I did watch the movie and I really enjoyed that, and I've been hearing this book get so much praise. I've only heard 5-star reviews. Literally, I have literally not heard anything below 5 stars, but I'm not really liking it. It's just not really for me. Yeah, I'll give more full thoughts on this in next month's wrap up when I do finish it. Maybe things could change by the end because this is also one that's kind of slow, and I've just needed a little bit more fast-paced books to really grip me recently. The other book I'm reading right now, I'm like 70% through this. I'm reading it on ebook through Libby, and that is Local Woman Missing by Mary Kubica. This is a story about this town where these women go missing, and the story is set in the past, 11 years ago when the first women go missing, and in the future when someone who went missing returns and what's kind of going on then. The story is very different from what I expected. I've heard really good praise about this book. I heard Gabby from Gabby Reads really adore it, and then I feel like a lot of people started reading it and really loving it too. I still don't really know where I stand 70% through. I think it's kind of just going to depend on how the end goes, but yeah, it's just really different from what I expected with the perspectives that are chosen to tell the story, and also just like how much of the story focuses on like pregnancy in particular. Just not what I expected. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see how this one goes. Stay tuned until September. Okay, so now we can talk about the books that I did finish reading, and the first one I'm going to start with is 56 Days by Catherine Ryan Howard. I did an entire reading vlog dedicated to this book, so if you're interested to hear my full thoughts or see my experience reading this book, you can definitely check that out. I'll link that above and down below. But I really had a great time with this book. I was not expecting it. I didn't know what to expect, because this is a book that is set during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic in Ireland. I just didn't know if it was going to be too soon and if that was going to be too much and if I would even enjoy that. But I really ended up having a really good time with this book. I ended up giving it 5 stars. 5-star thrillers for me are interesting because I've noticed when I give a thriller 5 stars, it feels really right in the moment, but then after some time passes, I'm like, why did I give that 5 stars again? And so I don't know, maybe this is more of like a 4-star instead of a 5-star, but I think just combined with me being surprised that I enjoyed it and how quickly I flew through it, I just got on like that reader's high feeling where you really just felt like you had a good time with the book and you immediately like slap a 5-star on it, and then later you're like, I don't know though, was it really a 5-star? So either way, I really enjoyed this book. Like I said, this is set at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is set over in Ireland, and it follows this couple who meets in a grocery store, this man and this woman. They kind of strike up a conversation, they start to get to know each other, they go on a date or two, and then the lockdown is really starting to begin. And so they decide, rather than being locked down and not being able to see each other, not being able to get to know each other for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, indefinitely, they didn't really know, that they would move in with one another and give that a chance to start their relationship. They weren't going to tell anyone because they knew it's weird and people would judge, and they were just going to see how their relationship went in these very unique circumstances. So that is what happens 56 days ago. And then in the present day, there's a dead body in the apartment that they have been sharing. And so you start the book not knowing who died or why or how we got there, and then you go back and forth between flashbacks to the past at different moments in time and the present day investigation of what has gone on in this apartment. And so there is a little bit of a detective POV, which isn't my favorite thing, but it really didn't bog down the story much. It was a little bit more casual. I do kind of wish that the story would have been told differently and from the perspective of like a resident in the community for the present day part, just because POVs from detectives are not my favorite thing, but it wasn't that bad. It was fine. But ultimately, I was just really nervous that this was going to be too much in the midst of what we're still suffering from in the COVID-19 pandemic, but it really did not bog the story down that much. It really just became more of a device to convince them to move in together quickly, and it really could have been anything else. It did not have to be like the pandemic. It wasn't too overwhelming. There's definitely like scenes where there's people wearing masks and they're talking about social distancing, and there's stuff going out of stock at the grocery store. So there's definitely elements of that throughout. But for me, in my opinion, it did not bog the story down. It was not too much too soon, and it ended up being a pretty compelling thriller. So yeah, somewhere between a 4 or 5 star, I don't know, but I really enjoyed it. Next up, I read another recent thriller, and that is The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Delilah Harris, and I also really enjoyed this. I've been having pretty good luck with thrillers recently, and this ended up being a 4-star read for me. This is a story that is set in the publishing world of New York City, and it follows this editorial assistant named Nella, who is the only black girl in the publishing house, and she feels very isolated by that. She's had a lot of microaggressions and uncomfortable experiences and tries to promote diversity in the workplace, but it's really not getting anywhere. And then one day, another black girl is hired at the publishing house, and so she feels a sense of hope and solidarity and like, oh my gosh, finally someone's gonna be here to help me push these efforts, and I'm not gonna be alone, and I'm gonna have someone I can talk to honestly. But things don't really go that way with Hazel, the woman who was just hired. She ends up being more of an opposing force than Nella suspected, and then Nella starts getting notes left on her desk that are threatening, telling her to leave her publishing house, and she suspects it could be coming from or related to Hazel's appearance at the office. This is definitely more of a slow burn, contemporary literary thriller than it is like a fast-paced full-on thriller. In fact, this is the book of the month copy, and it is even labeled by the genre as contemporary fiction on the back rather than the thriller category. So go into this with those expectations. don't expect this to be an extremely fast-paced thriller. This is more leaning on the horror side, to be honest. It reminds me of the same way that When No One Is Watching ended up being marketed as a thriller, but I think that book's more of a horror, and so people went in with different kind of expectations for the pacing and what to expect. But it was a really good book. It just got marketed in a way, whether that is marketing by the publishing house or by word of mouth, that just kind of misconstrued the idea of that story to other people. So I would definitely go in expecting this to be a slower paced book and a little bit more of horror rather than thriller, but definitely still has thriller vibes to it. Anyways, ultimately, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it had a really great payoff at the end. It goes in a similar kind of weird direction that When No One Is Watching does as well. I see a lot of comparisons between those two books, but I liked this one a lot more than I liked When No One Is Watching. I think the writing style in this was just really great. It really sucked you in. I flew through this book. I just loved the author's writing. I definitely will be reading more from them in the future. And I really think the way it all ties up in the end creates a really interesting metaphor or symbolism for what the book is trying to accomplish. So overall, really would recommend this one. Had a good time with it. Just make sure you know it's not going to be like an incredibly fast-paced, high-action thriller when you're going into it, because that might change your experience a little bit. Next up, another new thriller that I read this month was The Therapist by B.A. Paris, and this is the first book that I have read from B.A. Paris, so I had like nothing to go off, no expectations. I haven't really heard anything about this book. I was just kind of interested in it as being a starting place for B.A. Paris since it just came out. This is a story about this couple who moves into this community that is like very suburban, every house is the same kind of vibes. It is like a gated community. I think there's like 9 houses and they're all just numbered 1 through 9 and they're all like the same. Everyone's like upper class. It's just like very much suburban vibes. And it's about this couple who moves to this house in the neighborhood and they start to get to know the neighbors, and the woman starts to feel weird about the house because she learns that the previous tenants, the wife who was there in the house ended up being murdered and her husband ended up going to jail for it. But it seems like talking to the neighbors, there may be more to the story than that. And also it just freaks her out to be living in a house where someone was murdered. Overall, I thought this was a pretty good thriller. I gave it around like 3.5, 3 stars. I didn't do anything super original to like blow my socks off, but it was like a fun enough book to read. With domestic thrillers that the plot is just kind of like, there's a suburban area and there's drama, those don't really like usually blow me away. So I wasn't expecting like a ton from this book. It was just like a good enough fun time. I'm glad I got it on ebook from my library rather than purchase it, because like I said, there was just nothing like super special about it, but overall it was like a pretty good time. There's definitely some creepier moments and some creepy vibes with just the energy of the house and how she's like super uncomfortable there and the things she's finding and the creepy things that are happening to her. And it is kind of fun when there's a lot of different characters in a cast and you don't know who you can trust and who's telling lies and who's not and where the secrets are. I think that's really fun. And I also think this book did a good job of carrying a cast of a lot of characters without you getting confused or bogged down. I was definitely able to distinguish the different characters from one another. I could remember things about them. I knew who they were. I understood their connection to the story. I didn't get lost in this one, which can sometimes happen with a cast of a bunch of neighbors, but this one did it pretty successfully. There were some elements to the plot twist that were a little unsurprising to me, and it gets a little bit like cheesy villainy at the end, but overall thought it was a good enough time. Like I said, gave it around 3.5 stars, and I would recommend this if you're looking for just a quick thriller read, especially if you like the suburban dramas. Next up was one of my most anticipated books of the year, and that is Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaghy. As I'm sure you know if you've been watching my channel for some time, Charlotte McConaghy's debut novel Migrations is one of my favorite books of the year, like top 3. I love that book so much, and so I was super excited to see her follow-up because I just loved her writing, I loved her storytelling, and this one sounded like it was going to have super similar vibes, and it did. So this is a story about a woman named Inti Flynn who goes to Scotland to rehabilitate or rewild wolves. And so she's working with this group of wolves and they start in these cages and helping them rehabilitate, and then the goal is to get them back in the wild. And in those efforts, that's going to help the entire community because the wolves will feed on the deer and the deer are feeding on the crops, and so adding a predator into the ecosystem is going to be most beneficial to everybody in the community. However, there are community members who are obviously super concerned about the wolves coming. They've got sheep, they don't want their sheep to die, they're worried about their children children. It's just pretty uncertain what's going to happen when you just start letting a pack of wolves run around your woods. And so she faces a lot of pushback from the community. Also, at the same time, she is living with her sister, who is deeply traumatized from unknown experiences at the beginning of the book, and she does not speak. And so she is really a large support system for her sister. She's trying to help her sister also rehabilitate in a way. There's just a lot going on in this book. The story really kicks off when one of the farmers in the town dies, and everybody suspects that it is the wolves that killed the farmer, and she knows everybody's going to suspect that, but she really wants to protect her wolves. She also ends up starting to develop a romance with another guy in the town, and he appears to also be a suspect in what may be going on. So you have the community drama aspect, you have a romance in here, you have the sisterly relationship in here. There's a lot about just trauma and their childhood throughout here. And then there's a lot about just the environment, climate change, and you know I love a good environmental novel. So all in all, I ended up giving this book about a 4-star rating. I think it was just going to be hard for anything to really measure up to Migrations in my mind, because this is also very similar to Migrations. And so it's just difficult to read books that are very similar and love them both. At least for me it is. I usually will love the first one, and the second one I'm like, yeah, this is definitely good, but like it's not entirely original because I feel like I've read a very similar story before. The similarities between this and Migrations are numerous. They both follow these haunted main characters who have these troubling pasts and these secrets and are clearly going through a lot of emotional challenges, who are in these environments. There's the climate change aspect, there's the environmental aspect. They're trying to do something for the world. They're trying to make an impact on the environments around them. And then there's the parallels between what's going on in their natural environment and within themselves on their own personal journeys. So if you liked Migrations, odds are good you're gonna like this too. I definitely did. I really enjoyed it. There's just something about Charlotte McConaughey's writing that is so haunting, and that is the only word I can use to describe it, is haunting. It is just such beautiful lyrical writing. It leaves you with a feeling. I will never forget the way I feel when I read her books. I can instantly be thrown back into how I felt reading this book when I just think about it, and just the tone and the atmosphere overall is so good. So I'm definitely going to keep picking books up from this author because I'm loving her stuff. But like I said, this one was more of a 4-star than a 5-star, blow my socks off kind of thing. But I don't know, I'm definitely going to reread Migrations at some point, and I'll probably reread this one too, and then maybe my opinion will change over time. But for now, definitely recommend it. Just still would recommend Migrations first. Next up, I listened to one of my ALCs, Advanced Listener Copies, from Libro FM for the month of August, and that was A Slow Fire Burning by Paula Hawkins. I've been dying to read this book. I've just been so interested to see what Paula Hawkins does next since The Girl on the Train and Into the Water, because it's been so long since she's published a book, and so I was very interested to see what came next from her, and I ended up being a little bit disappointed. I ended up giving this book 2 stars. It just didn't really do anything special for me, and I wonder if part of that was just the audiobook experience, because this is a more complex thriller. There's more that you have to pay attention to and follow. There are a lot of characters. I kept getting confused. I was taking notes the entire time I was listening to it just to keep up with it. And so I feel like that may have dampened my experience a little bit. So I don't know if I would recommend audio for this one alone. However, Rosamund Pike is the narrator of this audiobook, which is lovely. I did love her voice narrating the audiobook, but I really would have liked to pair it with the physical book, which just was not out yet because this is an advanced copy. And so maybe I would consider approaching the story again, but in the physical form, or at least paired with the audiobook. But the audiobook alone, I was just so lost. So this is a story about this guy who ends up murdered in his London houseboat, and that sparks this investigation, and there's a bunch of different perspectives and people in the community who get involved, and you're just trying to figure out who done it. So a couple of the characters you're following, you have Laura, who was the one-night stand who was last seen with the victim. You have Carla, his aunt, who is already grieving the loss of another family member because he's not the first member of their family to die recently. And then you have Miriam, who is a nosy neighbor who really starts to mess with the investigation. Everyone has their own backstory and things going on and their secrets, and you're just trying to figure out what went on in this community and this family that caused this guy to end up dead in his houseboat. And I think one of the reasons I wasn't super compelled with the story is because it starts with him already dead, and so I didn't really care about him in the story. I was not too intrigued to learn who murdered him because it did not matter to me that he was dead. I didn't know him as a character. You just tell me there's this dead man and then you start showing me all these other characters. I'm confused. I can't even keep up with who's who. I can't understand the difference between Carla and Miriam, and there's an Angela and Laura, and there's husbands abound with all of these, and I just could not keep up with the story. I definitely know what happened. Like I said, I took notes, so I understood the plot of the story in order to know if it was satisfying or not, and it was fine. But overall, this book was just too confusing for me. I did not really care, and it didn't really do anything super special to me to make it stand out. So like I said, right now it's sitting at a 2-star rating from me. I'm super interested to hear other people's thoughts as more people start picking the book up, and maybe I'll give it a chance again in the physical form one day. Next up, I have another book that I did a full vlog for, and that is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So I did a vlog for this where I joined an in-person book club for the first time, and this was the selection. So it's kind of like a reading vlog and also me letting you know what the experience was like for me of joining an in-person book club for the first time. Overall, I did not really enjoy this book. I gave it a 2-star rating. I really didn't want to read it. It wasn't on my TBR. I heard about this book as soon as it was first announced, and it just did not sound super interesting to me. I have really liked Taylor Jenkins Reid's stuff in the past. I have read Daisy Jones and the Six and The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and both of those books I really enjoyed, but this one just did not sound like it was going to be up my alley, so I didn't really anticipate liking it, but I had to read it for this book club, and so I gave it a chance, and it ended up just being fine. So this is a story about this group of 4 siblings who are the children of Mick Riva, who is this famous singer. He also is present in other books from Taylor Jenkins Reid, so there is like an Easter egg connection. If you have read her other books, then you've heard of Mick Riva before, but there's no need to read other books to understand this one. It can be read as a standalone, and this one follows his children, who are all sort of celebrity status of their own, some of them more so than others. There's the oldest sibling, Nina, who is a surfer and a model, the oldest son, Jay, who is also a surfer, and then the 2 youngest siblings, a boy and a girl, Hudson and Kit, who also surf or take photos of them. They're just like a surfing family in Malibu. And every year they host this grand party where a bunch of celebrities come, and this year at the party, you know that it ends with fire. The house catches on fire, goes up in flames, but you don't know why. And so you're following the events that took place the day of this party, from the morning to the end of the party, from each of these characters' perspectives, but you also get flashbacks to the past with their father, Mick Riva, and his relationship with their mother, which was an on and off love affair throughout the 50s, I think, maybe 60s, 50s or 60s. I talk in depth about this book in that vlog. I think it's like 30 minutes long, so definitely go check that out if you want to hear my full thoughts on this book. I also have spoilers in that vlog, but I have it chaptered out so you can navigate between spoilers or non-spoilery sections in case you want to avoid the spoilers. But yeah, overall, I thought this book was just okay. It was pretty simple, straightforward plot, not really many surprises. Characters were fine, writing was a little bit cheesy at times, and it just wasn't for me overall. Next up, I have the books that I read for the 1,000 Doors Readathon, which occurred this month. It was a weekend-long readathon. I included Malibu Rising as part of that vlog, but I also read The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman and Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna McGuire in that vlog as well. So as always, if you want my full thoughts, definitely go check out the vlog, but I'll give you quick updates on how I felt about these 2 books. So first, The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. This is a story that is about this guy who goes back to his hometown for a funeral, and then he just starts reminiscing on his past and his childhood and these weird experiences he had with a neighbor girl when he was a child there. This book was nothing like I expected it to be. I just had this idea in my head of what it was going to be, and then it was something entirely different. So that sort of affected my reading experience, but also it was just much more surreal than I expected it to be. I typically like my fantasy a little more grounded in reality than this was, and so I think it was just a little too out there for me. I didn't really follow along with the whole story. It didn't really grip me, and it just wasn't really for me. So I ended up giving this one 2 stars. And then the other book I read in that readathon, Every Heart a Doorway, I adored. I gave this one 5 stars. I loved it, and I'm so excited to continue with the rest of the series. So this is a series about these kids who end up going through these portals that they find that take them to a different world. And there's all these different types of worlds. There are some that are more logical than others. There are some that have more rules than others. There's just all these different possibilities. And this story follows this house that this woman named Eleanor runs, where when children return back from the portals and then they can't get back to their other world, they usually end up pretty upset about it. They really miss those worlds. They don't really fit in the real world anymore. And so they go to this house for these wayward children. This is called the Wayward Children series. That is sort of a way for them to rehabilitate and accept that they are back in reality. But a lot of them have a lot of trouble with that. And so this story follows our main character, Nancy, who is arriving at the house for the first time. But then once she arrives, some dark things start happening at the house, and it kind of becomes a mystery of trying to figure out who's responsible for what is going on. I love this book so much. I love the characters. They're so quirky and fun and zany. I loved the pacing of the story. I loved the mystery element. Sure, it wasn't the most surprising mystery that's ever been revealed, but I still loved it. It was just the perfect book for me. It reminded me a lot of The House in the Cerulean Sea and had very similar vibes to that. So if you like that book, I would definitely recommend checking this series out. But like I said, I'm just really excited to keep reading the rest of the series and figuring out which book is my favorite. And the last book that I read is another thriller book that I checked out through Libby and read as an ebook, and that is The Turnout by Megan Abbott. I don't know, I was just interested in this one because I've been hearing some mixed things about it, and everybody's reviews are pretty ambiguous, and so I couldn't really figure out what was going on here. I wasn't like overwhelmingly interested in the idea of the story. I was just so curious to know what it was about because people's reviews were just so ambiguous. I just needed to know what was going on. So this is a story about these sisters who run this ballet company, and their mother used to run it. Their mother's no longer alive, and so now they run the ballet company along with one of the sisters' husband. And so it's always just kind of been the three of them. They've been together since they were children, and they are preparing for this year's version of the Nutcracker. And then an interloper ends up coming into the fold and kind of mixing things up between them. And that's kind of all the synopsis says, I think. So even the synopsis was super ambiguous, and I was just so curious about this book. It ended up being like a 3-star read for me, maybe even like a 2-star. I didn't really love it. There's a lot of complaints I could have about it, and overall it didn't feel like the story of what actually happened matched the tone of the rest of the book. So I'm seeing why people's reviews are ambiguous because it's kind of hard to describe this book without spoiling some things. But I'll just say this book has very much like Black Swan vibes. It's definitely been a while since I've seen Black Swan, so don't take me like super at my word for that. But you know how that movie's like just super dark and there's really long moments where there's not a lot of dialogue, it's just like intense music playing. It definitely gives off that feeling and those vibes. Also, it's ballet, so it's very similar in that way. There's a lot of focus on the human body in different ways, so it's just got a really dark tone to it, and there's some really dark things that have happened in this family's past as well that match with that. But the story of what ultimately ends up going on, what takes up time in the plot when this other person comes into the ballet studio and starts kind of causing problems between them, that reads more of just like a domestic suburban drama in a way. But then the rest of this feels like this like artsy noir, like A24 film type atmosphere that's going on, and so I felt like there was just a disconnect there that made the book a little underwhelming for me. But I will say all of the like artsy parts, the tone, the vibe, I really liked that. The rest of the story I was just like, this is kind of nothing new, nothing original, like that's not really serving much to the story. So yeah, I'd call that like a 2 to 3 star book. I'm not sure. Very curious to start hearing more people talking about this book and just see what other people are thinking. So that is it for all the books that I read this month. It was a pretty good reading month. I got to read a lot of thrillers and I got through more books than I expected. So not a bad time. Definitely comment down below and let me know if you've read any of these books and let me know what you think about them, or let me know if I've convinced you to pick any of them up. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!